So, hey everyone, Mark LaScola here. I guess broadcasting from Phoenix, Arizona, where it's going to be close to 100 degrees today, or over 30 Celsius. It's good to have you here. Today's webinar on focusing on building internal organization design capability and a center of excellence practice within HR is the topic that at hand, and we have some great panelists, and we'll have them introduce themselves in just a second. I'm the managing principal and founder. As you can see by the gray in my hair, I've been around and have a few stories to share. We'll share those wisdoms with you as we go through the webinar. Want to encourage you to write in any questions that you have. We'll be responding to those in real time as much as possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter. Peter, are you frozen?
No, I'm muted. There we go. Hi, Peter Turgoose, also a consultant with On the Mark. I'm based in the UK, where it's not 100 degrees. I think it's what we Brits call just pleasantly warm today. Are you going to move the slides on, Mark? I've been with On the Mark about 11 years, in that having joined from being having had a career in HR, so a background in both HR and organization design. I guess I started my career as a psychologist, and I've sort of stayed true to that profession all the way through. But keep my focus nowadays very much on organization design. Board member of the European Organization Design Foundation and a trustee of the Organization Design Institute. So really just looking forward to the conversation we have today, and particularly hoping to stay fairly quiet and listen to Jilly, Lynsey and Tricia share the benefit of their experience of working actually within HR, which is where I began, and I've still got the scars. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Reagan, just a heads up, I'm having some problems with my internet, and it's saying that it's a bit unstable. So we may have to have a fallback on sharing the screen. Maybe okay. Irina, maybe you could.
I can do it.
Okay, and you'll have to get the PowerPoint deck out of the email since I pulled it off the SharePoint.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's move forward. Just a little bit about On the Mark. We've been around for 30 years, and we've done redesigns for every type of business function, if you will, as well as enterprise-wide around the globe. This kind of gives you some of the locations where we've left our mark, pun intended. This is what we do. On the right here is accelerated change readiness, organization design, and business transformation, and skill building and program setup. And really that's the focus of today. Just wanted to give you that as a bit of background. We also have OTM's organization design solution. It's also available in an app format for iOS and Android. We can talk and answer questions about that at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tricia and allow her to introduce herself, and then we'll go to Lynsey and then Jilly. Tricia?
You're on mute, Tricia. Tricia, you're on mute.
It happens to the best of us. All right, so as I was saying, most of my career has been in HR, and as an HR generalist or as a business partner. My degree is actually in clinical psychology, and early on in my career, I provided mental health services to first children and adolescents, and then a geriatric population. And always in a residential setting, and working in a residential setting, I saw firsthand how in organizations' people processes, their selection, onboarding, retention practices impacted the treatment of my patients. And so I really started working with the executive leadership team on research-based selection and onboarding processes and best practices, and then incorporating those into the way we managed our human capital. And really, I quickly developed a passion for aligning human capital processes and strategies to the organizational strategy. And that's really what I've done throughout my career, mostly in the HR space. I've been in a leadership role since early on and practiced within healthcare, both within Chicago, Ohio, and now I'm in St. Louis. About 4 years ago, I transitioned to Edward Jones, and that was one of my first initiatives was a redesign of our marketing department. It was a high-risk OD initiative, and so it was led by one of our internal OD consultants, and it was really my first introduction into formal OD. It was a great learning experience and really just fed into my passion of understanding what the organization is wanting to accomplish and then aligning all of the pieces to meet those objectives and to fulfill that strategy. So even though I've transitioned through a couple of roles at Edward Jones, I have always been involved in OD efforts, whether I led them or I was coaching others through them. Until recently, when it was always in the capacity of a business partner, until recently I transitioned into an OC leader role, so org consulting leader, and now I'm responsible for actually building out the OD practice as well as workforce planning capabilities.
Thanks, Tricia. It's great to have you. Lynsey?
Hi everyone, and thanks Tricia. My name's Lynsey Bradley and I work for Victrex based in the headquarters in the UK in the Northwest. My role is as a strategic HR business partner, and part of my role is to support my particular functions with organisation design. Before joining Victrex, I worked for AstraZeneca for a number of years and had some quite significant projects around change and transformation in my business partnering role there. And I think I would probably say it's not until I actually joined Victrex and was brought in about 18 months ago by Jilly that I actually really got to understand and apply a true organisation design methodology. So the true methodology for me is still quite new, and I've been spending many months applying that within Victrex after a number of years having that change experience behind me. And before that, I was in specialist HR, particularly in global mobility, and all of the teams that work around global mobility as well, including reward.
Thanks, Lynsey. Great to have you as well. Jilly?
Hi everybody, thanks Lynsey. Good to see everybody this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are in the world. I've been with Victrex 2.5 years now. Prior to that, I am completely agnostic to industry and sector, airlines, FMCG, nuclear. I think the more challenging and more regulatory it is, the more I enjoy it. I've never found myself in a housekeeping role. But I did start off in the specialisms rather than in the generalist route. So I'm a bit of a back to front HR person. When I joined Victrex, very established company, very stable, but it was great to find that one of the team had already actually been through the On the Mark training as well. So I found a fellow ally and supporter of org design. But I've had different experiences in different companies and just pulled on different levers for org design from either a department, team, or whole organizational structure. I seem to have a sixth sense for it, so I enjoy it. And the different parts of the good old Galbraith model that we're all taught at HR school, I think because of the reward specialism as well, I've enjoyed bringing those two things together. I'm not afraid of the heartache that goes with some of this stuff as well, where the employee relations and industry relations has played in. So a bit like Peter, I've got some scars, but I still enjoy this very much. So it's a pleasure to be on the panel this afternoon. Thanks.
Thanks, Jilly. It's great to have you here. All right, well, let's pass it off to Peter. Peter, if you'd like to talk about a little bit of the drivers behind organization design.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I won't read all the words on the screen because you people can read them whilst I'm talking. I was reflecting really on why organisation design has not suddenly, but has come more to the fore in the last few years. And we've all been around in HR for a long time. And as Jilly said, we were all taught the Galbraith model many years ago. But for a long time, I've worked with, and I think probably a lot of you have worked with leaders whose only real view of org design is to throw something over the fence to HR and say, "Can you shuffle the deck chairs for me because I don't quite like the way things are working at the moment." And I guess with one foot in, I keep one foot in academia and one foot in business. On the academic side, it's interesting to see, and it genuinely is an exponential growth over the last 5 years in the number of papers that have been written about organisation design. And I think that's because leaders themselves are becoming much more aware of organisation design as a topic, and are starting to see it as being a bit more than just moving deck chairs on the Titanic. They are seeing it, they're starting to see different operating models being proposed by, well, not proposed, but talked about by other organizations. People talk about holacracy, people talk about agile, people talk about putting the customer at the heart of the business, but most people don't really know how to do that. They know that it's probably something to do with organization design and are starting to ask for it more and more. And I guess what's encouraging for me, and I guess encouraging for us that work in the profession, is that people, I think leaders are starting to get a better understanding of the value that organization design and proper organization design work can bring to the business. It doesn't mean they don't still throw it over the fence into HR, but I think it brings HR closer to the strategic table, and HR's got a strong voice now and a strong positioning around the whole methodology and approach to how organizations do go about redesign. So I think the time is, it is a good time for the profession. I think what we've got to do is to make sure that as professionals, and whether HR is the home of OD or whether it's somewhere else doesn't matter. What does matter is that we're really clear how we build that professional capability and how we deliver it and create value for the businesses that we're supporting. Mark?
How about from our panelists? Anything to add from your perspective on the increasing demand for organization design solutions? Anything you want to add around the drivers? All right. Well, let's go to our first question here to the panelists. And then, so the first builder button that we want to put on the table and have the panel talk about is when to use external and/or internal resources or a blended approach. And how about we open up that question to the panelists, and we'll let you start the discussion.
I think Tricia was actually going to answer the last question. She just didn't realize she was on mute.
Tricia.
Well, I felt Jilly, you beat me to the buzzer, and so I thought maybe I saw you on mute and thought you were going to respond to that. I think the only thing that I would add to, I agree with everything that Peter said. I think the increased demand is also due to the fact that the world around us has changed so significantly, and we've been through industrial revolutions that have changed the way we work. And I think that with the kind of the digital transformations that are going on and the amount of disruption that's happening from a competitive advantage perspective, organizations do have to work differently. They have to figure out how to respond faster within an increasingly complex environment. And due to the credibility that org design and HR has established over the years, I think that has led leaders to realize that org design can really help us deal with that increasing complexity and fast-moving environment.
I think I just got kicked off, so I apologize. I'm back.
Well, you missed my fantastic answer.
Well, actually, I heard the beginning and the end of it, so it was fantastic.
The middle was good as well.
Exactly. All right, well, let's keep going. First question to the panelists: when to use external and/or internal? And just a reminder, we're really going to deep dive into internal resources, which obviously each of you represent as well. So, anyone want to start this conversation from our panelists?
So I'm the one who's off mute, so I'll go first. I think it depends on the size of structure and what's been thrown across the fence at us, and how patient we want to be with some of it. So I've been in a situation where I've been the only person who's recognized the org design need. And I've recognized that I'm being asked to do things that are probably not fit for purpose from a structural point of view for the longer term, and would probably be a very costly exit. So with the benefit of some hindsight and some tactics, I guess, I've had to consider using external support before creating the internal team and the internal need. And I guess that's where I'd support the blended approach, because if you can do the design from a broad company level with external support, you can actually be a participant. And then I found that as a participant to then grow the internal resource provides that blended approach. But there's a little bit of trickery along the way to try and keep your internal customers happy, particularly those senior ones who are very fond of giving us the answers without being disrespectful. And I think that's the hardest part of it. So winning that trust in order to do that.
I think another thing to maybe add in there as well is that if there is a change within a global HR function and the internal resources sit in global HR, it's usually a nice time to actually separate and divide those different roles. I think in the same token, if you have a member of HR in another leadership team, it can be tricky, especially have that blended role of being a business partner and an organization design specialist, to play two roles where there needs to be a business partner and an organization design specialist. So if you have an internal resource and an internal team, then there may be a requirement for two specialists to be in the room, one of them to be the business partner in the leadership team, and one of them to play the specialist, and having those really clearly defined roles. If it's a HR change within HR, then it may be a good sign for there to be an external party involved to really help separate the two roles and to ensure that the ones in the room are making the decisions, but they're not necessarily having to facilitate the process at the same time.
Thanks, Lynsey. Jilly or Tricia, anything? I'm not sure you're on mute or not. I can't see.
Man, I think I'm just going to leave myself unmuted. So I agree with what Jilly and Lynsey said, that it really has to do with the size, scale, and complexity of the org design effort and the internal capabilities, whether it's from a capacity, skill, or experience, influence, level of leadership. I think all those factors should be taken into consideration, whether it's going to be something that's internally led, externally led, or a hybrid.
One of the questions, one of the issues that Peter and I discussed was whether it was a push or pull request. And maybe Peter, you could just add some insight into this one that we discussed based on push or pull, and then we can move on to the next question.
Yeah, I think yes, I have come off mute. I think it's and this is just a bit from experience. Whether Jilly, Lynsey, or Tricia have got a view on this, is I think it depends a bit on where the demand comes from as well. I think if it's the business requesting support from the CHRO or coming to HR and asking for support, it's often easier to operate purely with internal resources, because the expectation is that you're going to you're going to have the capability to deliver whatever it is the business is asking for. So in that situation, there's a push coming from the business into HR to do something to help redesign or change the operating model. Where I've found in the past it's trickier is when you I, as the CHRO, see that there's a demand, but the business doesn't see the demand. And this is probably damning myself here by saying this. Sometimes this is about the credibility that HR has got within the business. And the times I've found it useful to bring in external resources to help me is at those early stages where I could see there was a need for redesign work, but the rest of the board couldn't see it, and I needed the credibility almost of some external expertise to help me make the case before I went forwards. So for me, there is a bit of is it the business pushing something towards HR, or is it me having to pull the business towards me? And I think there are different situations and affect whether you use internal or external resource. I don't know if Tricia or Jilly or Lynsey have got any reflection on that.
I think a practical tactic could be that actually you see that you want to pull because you see that, and sometimes you have to mind the gap that, being an expert, you're seeing the symptoms all of the time, and perhaps seeing the symptoms that your own leaders cannot see, but you're hearing it and you're trying to piece together, almost the problem statement that gets you to, the requirement for organization design. But you can plant the seed a little bit every time, explaining the symptom, and getting the leader to, create the push themselves. So you can actually shift that a little bit. And I think, in your case, Peter, that the external resource at that point to really try and demonstrate that is quite powerful. But just testing the waters a little bit to just see how much of that is landing and how quickly a leader can get there, it can be quite important, because actually if they're really sharp on that and they're seeing those symptoms themselves, eventually actually, they can come to you and say, I think we need to do this. And that's a great way of moving from pull to push.
Yeah, completely agree, Lynsey.
And I think if I could add to that, Lynsey, I think there's the subtlety as well of, if you have the capability internally, you don't necessarily need to sound like you've been to HR school. So it's not necessarily talking about org design and here I am to fix you with my expert knowledge. It's if we're as a function with a great reputation and we've earned some trust, actually saying, well, that sounds like a symptom of this. Can we explore that further, rather than being a doctor and, that whole investigation. So I think if you've got that rounded team approach to org design internally as well, that talking the same language, different leaders, expressing the need for support, means often where there's, say, different departments that need to be merged or opportunities for functional complete reorg design, you can do that because you're looking across the different aspects as well and joining up those dots with those senior leaders, which if you're not talking the same language is really hard to do in that isolated role.
Yeah, and it is that danger. It's avoiding getting isolated. So you need that support around you, whether it's internal or external. But I think paraphrasing what you were saying, Jilly, it's really hard if you try and do it on your own.
Yeah, but even if you're not saying, oh, you need fixing and a new org design, just as a team and as a function, supporting people in the same way starts to build street cred for the function, which means they're more likely to come to you. But in the beginning, it might be more discreet, so it might be more of a push.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Certainly as you're building the team and the capabilities.
Anything you'd like to share before I pass it back to Mark?
I think the only other thing that I would add is sometimes it is the leader bringing you a solution, such as moving the deck chairs, or and so they think they have not only identified understand the symptoms, diagnose the issue, and they're bringing you the solution. In HR, they just want you to make it happen. And then through some good diagnostic questions and exploring their problems further, you can reach agreement that maybe we've jumped to the solution and there might be some other ways to get to kind of root cause and understand what's contributing to the current state before jumping to the solution. And the credibility and the relationships are foundational and necessary to be able to have those conversations.
Yeah.
I just want to remind participants that you're welcome to ask questions in the Q&A session. So we'll take any questions that you have or any comments, please add. Peter, I'm going to pass it off to you on this next question to the panelists.
So it's my turn to be on mute. So I guess this is a flow out of the conversation we've just had, really, which is if you know there's redesign work to be done, how do you get to the point, or do you have the skills and competence in-house to deliver the design? How do you make that decision? And I guess then what do you do about it? Because it's all very well, I think, for us all to go, yes, we've got redesign work to do. But I guess the question that follows on from that is, have we got the resource internally to be able to do that? And if not, what do we do about it? And I guess, you know, the three, you know, you three on the panel are here because, you know, you've built that capability and in yourselves, and probably seen the capability build around you. So it's really a question of how's that happened, and what do you think is the best way of addressing this need to build competence in-house? Maybe if we start with you, Tricia. You're on mute again, Tricia.
Thanks for catching it early. So I think if I understand your question correctly, I think that the need to build the internal capabilities really came from growth. So Edward Jones has grown quickly, and as we've grown in size, there has been a need for almost continuous realignment of teams and organizations in support of the work. And I think I had mentioned earlier that our org design COE is about 5 or 6 years old, and it really started with one individual as a senior consultant working with business leaders and understanding their strategies, what it is they're wanting to accomplish, and then making sure that all the components of the organization are aligned in support of that strategy. And she effectively built a lot of credibility, and we saw an increase in demand coming from the business that they wanted more org design support as they saw the benefits of that work. And so from there, we have built out the COE. We've had our own challenges building the internal capabilities. And so a lot of times the decisions about whether or not we resource it internally or externally come down to capacity and the size, the number of senior consultants that we have available to do it. I would say we have a federated model. So as a COE, the senior consultants are usually reserved for the highest and most complex org design efforts. And then we work closely with our HR business partners to make sure that they are able to lead through kind of lower risk, lower complexity efforts as well.
From a Victrex point of view, in terms of where that competency lies in the new HR operating model that Jilly created, the capability and the competence for organization design now sits in the strategic business partner role with Jilly's leadership. And that means that, you know, as a small team, we're equipped to connect those dots and to spot the opportunities for a requirement of organization design. But I think, you know, depending on the size or the scope of that particular design, there may be a blended approach which is needed, but that competence still sits internally. And so that blended approach of having you know, some support externally where it's needed means that actually, you know, once you get through that stabilization piece, then the competency to really help make that stick is there, and that's long term. So you know, for Victrex, I think the answer has been to have a really strong strategic business partner role that has that competency, but there will be times where that model needs to be flexed.
And I think if I go back to a previous life, the reason that what Lynsey's just described is in place at Victrex now is because I saw the benefit of it when we were a team of 60 people in-house with the same in-house training behind us, the same models to draw upon and the same insights to share. It meant that with a company of 100,000 employees as a band of 60 people, we could make sure that we were joining the dots in either small or medium size org design, but we had a very small centre of excellence, similar to what Tricia described, to do the very broad overarching redesign work as well, but knowing that it all fitted together beautifully like Jenga. And what's been really interesting since, probably I want to say maybe 5 or 10 of us have carried on with that philosophy as well. We've seen it in a big structure, and we've also put it in smaller structures where we've all gone on to work. And I think you typically unleash the interest in your teams when you give them a skill set that they didn't actually know would be useful. And I think that's just something that you have to trust the size of the organisation to see whether it's needed or not, and whether to, as we've said earlier, whether to buy it externally or build it in-house. But if you want to grow your own teams and provide a development opportunity that some people just don't know is there as a centre of expertise, I think it's a great way to do that and bring a dimension to the strategic business partner role, but also to set your team up with a set of skills that are really unique, which gives them a differentiation factor and makes them a much more powerful person in the market, which is a real shame when you leave them behind or they leave you, but you've got to be pretty selfless about that.
So can I just keep the spotlight on you for a second, Jilly? Having been in a number of organisations that's built a organisation design skill set and built that competence, do you have I guess a view on the best way of building that skill set and the best way of building that competence? And so is it just you hope people have got it, or do you train? Do you put them through training, or is there a combination of a hybrid that's worked best for you?
And sorry, just to interrupt here, as you go about answering that, do you mind kind of explaining a bit also like how long you expect it to take to develop those capabilities?
Sure.
Yeah, we've got some questions coming in just from participants. So why don't you just add to Peter's question?
So to Peter's question, I think the reason I was given the insight, which turned into hindsight eventually, was having been done unto through a very thorough process of redesign and seeing the benefits of that, and then following through a systematic process. I moved from a very forward-thinking best practice HR structure to less structure, less best practice, and actually there are a couple of fundamentals that I could see missing, which were around 2 factors: org design and reward. And I think often if you can get some of those, what I'd call backbone skill sets in your team, whether it's a centre of expertise or in a portfolio role. So Peter, I think to answer your question, I've identified whether it's somebody who has the ability but just doesn't know it's there as a specialism, or where somebody's on a career path to want to take the #1 seat, and actually it's going to set them up for with a life skill if they want to follow that HR path. But being quite about it, I think, is something as well. You have to allow your team to get better at it than you, because they practice it more often. And so I think, I don't know whether Tricia would agree, but you tend to do it at that helicopter level, and you leave some of the smaller redesigns, and that's where you get to really practice. So unless you partner up with somebody, and we're small enough in Victrex that we can do that now as a team, and to keep each other's skills fresh. So I hope that answered the question, Peter.
Yeah. It did. I'm going to put the spotlight a little bit on Lynsey, because she was on the other end of it. So she was in an organisation that you came into and was, you know, done unto, as you might say, Jilly. So Lynsey, what was it that helped you move from? I think you described yourself as not really knowing what org design was in a previous organisation to now, you know, being deep in it. What's the learning process you've gone through?
I think, you know, having managed so many different change projects, I think I was always looking for the full toolkit, and I think I probably describe being in a situation where, you know, previously I could see that there were gaps in the toolkit that I had, and I could see that it didn't flow, and, you know, we weren't solving all of the problems, but I could never find a full solution. And there was some ignorance around that, you know, that what we had was good enough, and I just didn't feel it was good enough. And transitioning into to Victrex and understanding methodology that really does, you know, it's that holistic piece, and a full thorough toolkit to really help is just, you know, it's quite transformational. So, you know, very quickly I felt very upskilled, and I could bring in, you know, different skill sets into that to really bolster it, you know. So, you know, being the process facilitator in that scenario means that, you know, I can apply the coaching skills required to really help build, you know, the demand, you know, really helping leaders to understand what the problems are and coming up with some of the solutions. So, you know, for me personally, it just felt like this real shift into having the confidence and genuine capability of being able to manage organization design projects in such a differentiated way, and knowing that it was a holistic approach. You know, for me, that was just, you know, a very, very clear and visible shift from, you know, within a very short period of time.
Okay, thanks, Lynsey. Anything you would add, Tricia, before, well, anything you would add by coming off mute before I hand it over to Mark?
Now you're proactively letting me know. I think that what Lynsey and Jilly shared is really similar to what I would share. We do practice the 70-20-10 model. And I would say from a capability building perspective, we have a solid toolkit to provide the 10%. And then we have lots of opportunity to deliver and get it through, and to gain confidence and competence through experience. I think where we need where we have opportunity for improvement is the coaching that the org design team can provide to the business partners who are executing.
Okay, thanks, Tricia.
There's a few questions, Peter, I want to have the panelists address here.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm gonna, so first of all, I'm gonna set it up, and then the three questions are, and I'm gonna give you a minute to think about it, Lynsey and Jilly and Tricia, is how long does it take to upskill and get people ready to go? Number two has to do with, Lynsey, you talked about a toolkit. Many org design trainings talk about just what is org design, but then how to do it. So what about the what and the how, not just the what? Or do you have anything to say about that in terms of what you've gained? I think for now, those are the two questions. But I want to highlight something that Tricia mentioned that's really critical is. Peter, and on the mark, our experience has been that for most practitioners, a 3-day workshop or a 5-day workshop isn't enough. And what's required to really get the people to gain a level of confidence and competence, as Tricia said, is really applying the 10-20-70 model of development, which is not only learning, but then having support around you, as well as getting thrown into the project and designing those projects and doing that work simultaneously with observation and feedback. And so we think this is critical to really building organization design skills. The other piece that I want to emphasize here, and I'm going to talk about when you train people, it's critical that you get them into applying an organization design project almost immediately. And there are exceptions to this. An example is, Lynsey, I don't mean to make you blush, but I'm gonna kind of, given what we know about the work that you're doing, is you did a level of training, and then Jilly had the expectation that you're going to apply it right away. And the same thing with you, Tricia. And the beauty of that is it requires you to start to apply immediately the learnings you've had, as well as the fact that you both have support around you to kind of talk with colleagues and talk it through and say, what should I do? And so Peter and I, one of the things we've learned is don't train people and not have them apply that work almost, we typically say within a month or so. Sometimes we say as much as 2 months, but not much more than that, or else they'll just lose the opportunity and lose the skill sets. So with that said, can the three of our panelists, can some of you address like how long does it take, about the what and the how, any reflections or wisdoms that you have would be great.
I'll jump in just because I'm not on mute. In terms of how long does it take, at Victrex, we decided to redesign ourselves first. So we had some cynics in the team who didn't believe that I had something fixed and ready under the table that I was just pulling out that was a tried and tested model. But I really wanted to understand the gravitational pull of what we needed for our business in terms of structure and HR to be better for our business strategy. So we spent probably 9 months on that work. And then we started to embed in the team. So we've spent the last 18 months in terms of developing capability in the team, finding opportunities. And now, if Lynsey might blush again, but it's now all about providing the air cover so that we make sure that we give each other enough time and space to deliver on these projects. So we've got about 5 moving parts at the same time. It's been really good in terms of feedback from our customers. But what we're finding is that they want us to go faster, and we're teaching them to go slow to go fast, because they're now realizing the size of the, if you like, the problem that they've brought forwards, and nobody's addressed some of these things for years. We put a matrix model in by just moving the deck chair parts, so we're now undoing some of those. What do you do? Lancing the boils. We're probably doing some of that. So what was a nice pocket-sized project for Lynsey has probably grown bigger. So in terms of that capability in the team, we've got plenty of work, and I don't think Lynsey will be escaping org design for probably the next 12 months to 2 years. So, but in terms of embedding a piece of org design after we've done the work, we've given ourselves 2 years to do that as an HR structure. So I've answered 2 questions there, sorry.
Tricia or Lynsey, anything to add?
I think what I probably would add is that, I think I agree, Mark, that you can't have a 3 or a 5 day workshop and feel trained. I think going into that, you have to have a project ready to go. And I think in my case, I probably had too many to choose from. But you need to take that training and then instantly apply it. And I think you need to see a project all the way through to feel very comfortable with all the different phases of organization design. And each project is unique, so it can feel very different each time. And I think you get a learning experience out of each one of those. So, the time that it takes, I think you could learn forever around organization design. And Peter, note, from an academic point of view, there are all of those new different ideas and concepts that really help to reinforce, or at least see, how the environment shifts and how that affects organization design as well. Mark, I think you wanted for me to touch in terms of the toolkit, but one of the things you can come away with is having that really substantial toolkit in knowing, you know, having a real structure around how you operate through those phases, and knowing that you've got the confidence of that toolkit to really help to practically apply organization design. But on top of that, I think you need some really key resources to really help you go through that. So one of the things that I think is really important is having that mentoring in place. You know, every organization design project is unique. You need that ongoing support to really help you to become unstuck when you feel a little bit stuck. And, you know, there's no, you need to ask the questions. You know, you're not going to be the expert in everything, and you just sometimes need that unlocking. I think the other thing that can be really helpful is having some of that coaching in place as well to really help you to resolve some of those organization design problems for yourself. You know, and I would look to Jilly to help with some of that as well, because I know Jilly's role, you know, within Victrex when it comes to organization design is to take that helicopter view. So, you know, she can help to unstick some of the problems that fall outside of potentially that organization design project as well. But you know, once you've got all of those things in place, I think the other thing that you need is to have that really free space in which to operate as a specialist. So, you know, I know Jilly physically steps back and allows that space, but you do need that space to be a free radical. You know, you need to feel comfortable that it doesn't matter who reports to who, that you can follow that work and you can see it through. And you've got somebody behind you in that helicopter role supporting you all the way through that.
Thanks for that, Lynsey. Just to add a little, and Angie asked a question, has to do with further on the what and the how. And Angie says here, and I'll give it to the panelists and then we can talk about it because we will get to it, is Angie clarified here with a question that says, just to clarify, my question is about what and the how of org design. What's the methodology versus individuals developing capability? So there's the whole thing of you as you develop your own skills and competence and confidence in org design versus the methodology. One of the things I'm going to say here is our last builder by question, which we will get to, is the methodology. Do you create it? Do you build it yourself? Do you buy one off the shelf or some hybrid? But is there anything else you want to say about your own upskilling, your own development, and that process before we move on to the next question?
Can I add something, Mark, before we just give them a chance to think? I was thinking about, I'm not quite sure who said it about what you get trained in. I think a bit depends on the size of the organization, which Jilly talked about. One of the things I learned back in my CHRO days, where I had 68 business partners, but all 68 weren't going to be doing org design at the same time. So that was the point about we couldn't train them all in depth until we needed them to go out there and actually do it. But what was important, that we trained them all in breadth, so that all 68 understood at a high level what the methodology was, so that everybody spoke the same language from the beginning. So I think there was for me in my HRD days, that question of where do I go for depth and where do I go to breadth? But I did have to make sure that, in my view, I had to make sure that everybody at least understood the language and understood the methodology, so that everybody, when the team were together or when they were talking to their people in the line, they were all using the same language.
Yeah, the last thing, anything, Peter, you want to say about these practical wisdoms before we move off, or anything anyone want to highlight, you want to point out?
I think the one I would say, and this I would build on, I think it builds on something Lynsey said, really, is, the best way to learn is to learn on your own cases. So we're saying use real projects or relevant case studies. You really hit the ground running if you take a known business need into training, so that when you come out of the training, you've already worked through some of the thinking on that, and you can hit the ground running straight away and start to deliver that project.
Could I add, Mark?
the,
Sorry, just
go ahead, Jilly.
a practical example. So I've stuck with the same methodology all the way through, but applied different strands and different elements. And my real dog-eared file is stuck in storage and I miss it. So thank goodness for the app. But one of our team who was trained over 20 years ago in the same methodology, I think has found that coming full circle, we've got 3 strategic business partners and then a team of partners that support them. But she was trained 20 years ago. Her new colleagues have been trained recently, and she tried to invent her own shortcut to that off-the-shelf package, or she'd reinvented something for speed with her customers. And then all of a sudden we've reminded her and reinvented her interest in, actually, if we do this properly, it's better. And I think that she's found that it's almost a newfound wisdom for her that by playing with something over the years, she's gone back to where she started, and then she's applying those core skills. And so working then in conjunction with Lynsey and Lynsey's colleagues means that actually we're all back on that same information, same language, same structure. So something tried and tested 20 years ago has sort of been dusted off and brought back into the foreground. So it's interesting to watch how somebody's tried to play with it, mess with it, redesign it, and come right back full circle.
Yeah, and Lynn Bourget, just an FYI, is you're absolutely right about wrapping the teaching around real work. And I think, Tricia, you did the exact same thing in terms of immediately going back and applying what you've learned and what you had in-house already. Nothing like right now to start to apply. And I'm assuming that that works for you and your team as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that there is a way to really build the competency and the skills needed without being able to apply it. So we have a toolkit that talks about the what and the how, and it's an internally developed model that's grounded in research, and it's a good reference for the designers and practitioners. But if they aren't able to actually apply it and then receive coaching, then it just becomes a document that sits on a shelf.
Last thing I will say is, and one of our participants mentioned it in terms of the importance. Well, let me go backwards. I had the fortunate experience to actually be a vendor partner with Peter over 20 years ago when he was an internal HRD for the Royal Mail. And we did more deep dive training with those who actually had more experience, meaning more tenured HR professionals, and did a little bit more just a primer or just an overview for those with less experience. It's our experience that, like Tricia and Lynsey and certainly Jilly, because they have so much deep knowledge of the business and real world experience, it's easier for them. It may not always be easy, but it's easier for them to get the head around organization design. For someone who's early and new in their career, that is a longer road. And Peter, maybe you have something to add to that with regards to the importance of experience under your belt to really fully appreciate organization design versus just coming out of school and university and not having a whole lot of real world experience.
Yeah, I think there's probably not a lot I can add. I think you said it quite well. I think from experience, I think people need to, and I'll use the phrase that Jilly and I have both used, you need to have got a few HR scars along the way, and to understand that breadth of HR. And I think it is part of a HR development path. And in the UK we have what's called the CIPD, and they have a development path, and it always starts with all the basics. You understand recruitment, understand the reward, understand this, understand the other. I think in the early days of your career, particularly in HR, you are quite focused on those transactional elements, and you sometimes have to get those under your belt before you can move on to really get the bigger picture of how that all pulls together into an overall business operating model, and fits within the Galbraith staff, for a simple answer to it.
Great. Let's we're going to go ahead and move on. The next question has to do with building a COE in our practice, and this is my question to the panelists. Would you add anything here that you haven't already talked about? Which is, there are times when you just need one person internal, you've trained them, but for example, Tricia, and same thing for yourself, Jilly, is you're building more of a center of excellence. You're putting that in your business partners. Tricia, you're more of a traditional COE. Anything that you would add in terms of any wisdoms about the choice to do that? Tricia, looks like you might have a few things to say.
I would say that the org design COE at Edward Jones was kind of a grassroots effort. I would say it grew from the bottom up. I don't know if there was ever an intentional decision where the senior leaders identified a need, much like Jilly has provided to her organization. I don't know that we've had a senior leader or CHRO come in and acknowledge we need to build the internal org design capabilities. As I mentioned, our one senior consultant 5 or 6 years ago started working with the business and kind of demonstrating to them what this discipline could provide. And it built a lot of credibility and increased the demand. And so from a grassroots or bottoms up perspective, I think we've evolved into a COE. I wouldn't recommend that approach. I do recommend being intentional about if you're going to build a COE doing so, because I think a lot of the skills to within org consulting and org design specifically are portable, and I think that we can be seen as sort of utility players, and we can get pulled into solving big complex problems that may or may not be true org design. And what that does is it diminishes our capacity to really build out the COE. So I think a long way of saying one of the biggest kind of wisdoms I have, or one of the opportunities we have in front of us, is to be intentional about building a COE and reserving the capacity in order for our consultants to practice, as well as build out the practice to be able to support the business partners who are out also practicing.
Thanks, Tricia. Jilly or Lynsey, anything to add? All right, if not,
can I add? I'll add something, Mark. And it's just a reflection from my own experience. I think a lot depends on the size of the organization. I think when we're talking about COE as a piece of structure where you have a small amount of expertise, deep expertise in the subject of organization design, for me, I think that depends very much on how big the organization is. If you're a smallish organization, then you can you can have all your business partners skilled in organization design and do what Lynsey said about having them, working together and pairing with each other. When I was in a much larger organization where I said we had 68 business partners, they were in that position where they weren't going to, they might not be using their organization design skills maybe for a year or maybe for 2 years, depending on what was going on in that part of the organization. So we took a deliberate decision because of that to build a very small center of excellence. It was only 3 or 4 people who were deep experts in organization design, who then partnered up with the business partners when they were needed. So the business partners had the skill and capability, but we had some deep experts who worked with them when they first got deeply into a design project. So I think whether you have that, functional element of a deep expert COE is a size issue as much as anything for me.
I think it could be size or timing, could the beta, because you could be on the cusp of transformation and you really need what was broad knowledge to really then become quite deep. So, looking back and hindsight is a wonderful thing. Having rolled off one transformation project after another, an expectation is that it was embedded into a generalist role, and yet there was no center of excellence. So in your model, having those 3 or 4 people to really draw on for that deep expertise when it was needed is, it feels, quite like a nice mix and a nice blend. But I look back now and see that when I was leading those transformation projects, that deep knowledge wasn't there, and I now in hindsight don't feel equipped enough to have led on some of those projects, not having that deep expertise to draw upon. But that, in hindsight, one project on its own, you may feel that there's not enough to of a business case. And actually, after 5 to 7 years of moving from transformation to another, I think it would have been a really clever idea to have tried to build that capability before going on what would have been a much longer journey of transformation for an organisation. And I think it might be, might have been quite a big miss.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at that in the context of Victrex, it is on the cusp of growth. And now is a good time to really try and build that capability internally.
I do want to highlight that whether you take your organization design expertise and put it in your business partners, or if you build a COE, both are a structural element that impacts the design of HR and have to be accommodated for. So both are viable options, and we've seen both of those work. They just have trade-offs and things that you have to think through. And which we're going to address here in just a second. Peter, you want to take this next question?
Yeah, I think Jilly touched on it, so we can probably go through. I'm just looking at the time as well. We'll go through it fairly quickly, but I guess starting with you, Jilly, and then maybe going to Tricia, you're in a COE, Lynsey, you're a business partner who's working in the line trying to deliver this. I guess there's 2 questions here. One's for you, Jilly, which I think is, what do you have to do? What do you see as your role as a CHRO to support your people who are doing the design work? And then the other side of the question, when we come to Tricia and Lynsey, what is it that you look to your CHRO for to help you to be able to do this work effectively? So maybe if I can kick off with you, Jilly, and then you can pass off to either Lynsey or Tricia.
Oh, I'm not on mute, no. So, of course, I wouldn't say this to my customers, but I think we need to be a little bit cunning in our planning for some of these things, particularly when people are at different parts of their learning journey and developing in this particular skill set. So in terms of supporting the team, I know everybody wants everything to go faster. And actually just I mentioned it earlier, providing the air cover is really important. Doing the helicopter, stepping back and looking to see actually where there's other opportunities, and we've got a real live one of those, and unleashing some of that's really important. So we have a medical part of our business and an industrial part, yet we have separate quality teams supporting them. Would you do that if that was your own business? What opportunities exist there? And as business becomes more regulatory, medical isn't the only place where it's quite strong and tough in terms of quality. So understanding the number of projects, I think, is also quite important to support that capacity piece. And if you've had something of a tactical business partner in the past and you're trying to upskill the business partner, or the nature of the role, I've started to talk about the horizons of the work that the team work on. So Lynsey's focus is 3 to 5 years. So her work should be focused on that 3 to 5 year horizon, with the supporting team looking at the stuff in 1 to 2 years. And that's then signaling to our customers that that's where time and energy will be spent. There's also just the corridor conversations about, oh, we haven't done this before, what happens next, the curiosity and the reassurance. And we do have some leaders who are closet HR people, and they're desperate to get their hands on some of these tools. So I think actually just saying to people, that this is fun to do this properly as well, and the sense of satisfaction at the end is really worth it. And we've got one leader who I'm thinking of, this will make Lynsey smile because she'll know exactly who I mean. In fact, 2 of them who are enormous hurry-ups, and they think this should have all been done 2 months ago. But as we keep pointing out, I know, Lynsey, the projects are all called moons, aren't they? And there's that many moons now because of the work that Lynsey's unleashed. But I have to accept that that's a capacity issue with our team, and buddying the team up as well to support each other, I think, is important. And speaking that same language. Sometimes not calling it org design, but actually being able to say what's in it in the longer term, and asking some of the same questions, but in a different way. I think one thing I would add is we all need to keep each other fresh as well in our thinking. And if you didn't have that sounding board, it would be very difficult to keep our skills fresh and our thoughts fresh and staying ahead, because I'm a bit of a fan of always look at the org design before you go off on what's on trend. But often what's on trend is what's driving the org design. So keeping that balance is also that really important piece. And if you know the secrets about what M&A is ahead, or what you might be divesting, then actually thinking some of that into the work that you're supporting your team with is quite important as well. I hope I answered your question.
That's great. Lynsey, I'm going to remind you, use the term free radical, which we often use to describe the org designer. Earlier you said that. So what does it look like in terms of the role Jilly plays to give you air cover? And Tricia, will come to you next.
Yeah, it feels like there's no truer way of describing me at the minute. It's almost like it's upsetting the apple cart a little bit, isn't it? For me, for me to operate in that true organization design space and be that free radical, I absolutely need that trust of the CHRO, in this case Jilly, to really have my back in some of that, because I think the example that Jilly's used is a great one. You could have leaders who expect this to be very one-dimensional and therefore really quick, a misunderstanding that it's like shuffling the decks, not necessarily in the detail of the design and the work that goes behind it to really see how thorough and holistic it is, and therefore is kind of sitting there really impatient for all of the answers. And sometimes you need to keep all the different team members within HR, so my colleagues and other strategic business partners as well as Jilly, updated to ensure that as those leaders are working with others around the organization, that one, we're connecting the dots, but also when that comes up in conversation, we are all speaking that same language, and we can support each other in that sense, because sometimes those frustrations can flow out a little bit because we're trying to teach an organization and its leaders who have always gone very quick to go slow to go fast. And sometimes it's got really quickly, and sometimes it takes a little bit more time, and it really depends, I think, on how deep they go into some of that work that they do. But if they keep at that helicopter level, then sometimes it's really hard for them to really understand why it can feel like it's taking too long.
Thanks, Lynsey. Tricia?
I don't have much that I would add to what has already been said. So I think emphasizing the key points that resonated with me is really, I look to our CHR to help to provide collective intelligence, if you will. So I can provide what we're seeing within the org design space, and she would have knowledge of the direction the organization is heading and making sure that we stay aligned. So we're not doing an org design effort that's following the latest trend and redesigning part of our organization in a way that actually is going to create conflict or tension with the broader transformation journey or where we're heading in the long term. So I think it really boils down to trust and transparency. So me having trust in her to be vulnerable so that she can provide feedback and help me grow as a consultant and a practitioner, but then also for her to trust sharing information with me so that I know where the puck is heading and we don't take individual organizations off course of where the enterprise is heading.
That's great.
And then I think I kind of touched on this earlier, it's the time and the space. So I know it's been said several times, but just the importance of going slow so we can go fast, the importance of making sure that we understand the business direction before we dive into even looking at the work, and much less moving around the deck chairs. And so again, having confidence in our methodology, in our abilities, and then giving us the time and space to do what we know needs to be done.
That's great. We've pulled together some practical wisdoms. Peter, I'm going to put you on the spot. Maybe you can pick your one or two that you think are significant from this list that we've accumulated from doing this work.
I would I guess because my heart and mind are always back in HR at times, and I think Jilly mentioned it. I think what's critical to making this work is making sure that the HR operating model is designed to accommodate it. It's too easy, I think, to think we can just plug this in as a capability and life will continue. Your life will continue, but we'll start doing organization design work. I think, as Lynsey has said, it is quite time consuming. It does mean that you need to partner up with other people. If you are going to introduce a CEO like they have done within Tricia's organization, that again is a change to the operating model for HR itself, and being really clear. In almost in design language, if you do introduce a CEO, where does the power lie? Is it with the business partner or is it with the CEO? Because you can, I've tripped over getting to some of those tangles around, is the CEO driving this work or is the business partner driving it in partnership with the line? So for me, the fundamental one is this: don't just think you can plug it in as a capability. You have to design an HR operating model that can accommodate it and ensure that it's delivering value for the business.
Yeah, I think for me, I have two favorites. One is the calibration of the HR roles and jobs that are actually going to be delivering this work. Mm-hmm. I use the term magical thinking. We train people and then you go off and do it, and you do it at 8 o'clock at night without any work-life balance. And I think, as Tricia or maybe Lynsey can attest, is how many real design projects can you have on your plate at one time, and what happens to your other job responsibilities that are more traditional HR roles and work. It's not enough to just train people and expect them to go out and do it. You have to really look at the job. And then the other one that I think Jilly mentioned early on, is to bolster the retention strategy of the newly skilled organization design practitioners. They become highly sought after and poachable. And it's something that you have to
tell Lynsey that.
Okay, now I know what to say. So you're right. Thanks, Jilly. Anyway, before we move on to the last question, anything you want to add, panelists? And I'm just going to give you a couple minutes so we can get to the last question.
Can I just give maybe a practical example?
Yes.
Part of the organization design work that Jilly did with her then leadership team, and I came into Victrex as a direct result of that project. The roles had been designed, the strategic partner roles had been designed to have organization design specialism within it, and that was the model that is right for Victrex. But that couldn't happen without having a really strong HR partner team working collectively with the strategic business partners. And I think it feels like a long road, but I think in terms of timing, it's only been 18 months to 2 years, where that team, which is a blend of old and new faces, has really been upskilled, so that at a point when practically speaking, that design work becomes quite challenging. I know I've got a team of partners who are really able to step up and take more challenging projects and development opportunities to step in that space that I leave behind, so that I can really fully concentrate and focus on some of the design projects. And that's really key, because I know that without having that stronger business partner team in place, I couldn't dedicate my time to the many design projects that I'm currently involved in. So I think that's really key components. It's not just about that single role, it is about that full operating model that Peter described when looking at if you decide to build it into the HR team, then whether it's as a blended role or as a centre of excellence, you have to really think about all of the mechanisms around that really make that successful.
Tricia,
if I could very briefly add, we were very deliberate in the, I could never say this word, in the nomenclature that we used for our team, because we wanted to make sure that people couldn't assume that people didn't have the authority to act. So strategic in there because of the horizon work. And we use the title HR partner rather than business partner for those people that are acting in bigger roles than a typical advisor role. So people don't quite know what to do with them because they don't look like anything they've ever witnessed before. But it's our way of indicating to the business that they are very capable people, some of them that we're stretching, but that's our way of doing it. And then the people who support the broader administration, we're doing the same with them. So we've been we think it's a cunning plan.
Tricia, anything to add before we move?
I contrast what Jilly and Lynsey have described to what I described earlier as our kind of grassroots effort. And I certainly think that we aspire to have an operating model similar to what Lynsey and Jilly have described. We just haven't been as intentional. So I think the wisdom is that having a CHRO who has that vision and perhaps the intestinal fortitude, as well as some cunningness to build an HR operation that supports org design is something that would be very valuable.
I think the other thing you're implied in what you're saying, Tricia, is the importance as you do a grassroots based on demand, that you don't get ahead of the business, so you don't grow something or build something that's never going to be utilized. So you have to do it kind of based on demand and build that street credibility one project at a time.
Right, and then almost overnight, the demand exceeds your capacity. And
right. That's right. That's the other thing.
Our priorities will always be supporting the business needs, and so the trade-off with that is then shortcutting the evolution of our methodology and tools.
That's right. Good, excellent wisdom. All right, last question. Create your own versus purchase a proven solution. What's your experience on this? Before we kind of wrap everything up, I'm going to give everyone about no more than about 3-4 minutes to comment on this. What do you recommend and why? Panelists, any thoughts?
Go, Tricia.
Well, I think at this point in time, my recommendation is to really buy something. With taking on a new role, one of my development opportunities was really to increase my technical knowledge and understanding of org design. And as I've done my own research and training, which includes the On the Mark Masterclass, I've seen that a lot of the best practices, methodologies, and toolkits are grounded in the same methodologies. And so I think that it is worthwhile buying proven methodologies that have kind of stood the test of time to more quickly build that internal capability.
Lynsey, you want to go?
Yeah, having worked in the two different camps, I think that the buy model personally suits me better. I think I've searched for many years trying to find the solution that you could buy off the shelf, and have failed many times over to find such a comprehensive methodology. Now having that in place, I would struggle to see anything beyond that. And I think the caution that you can have with developing that model is that you can have that creep, and you can get quite lazy in its application, where I think the buy solution, what you're buying is the expertise around that as well, and I think that's where it can have real power.
Jilly, anything to add?
I think buy has worked for me. I've joined a company where they've built their own, that in a subsidiary we reverted back to a bought methodology. So I think the buy bit is more transferable as well. So if I think about my peer group, when I was one of that 68 that Peter described in that pool, we've all gone on to carry on using the methodology that we bought and shared that with our teams. And that's been an easier way to cascade it through. Whereas if every time we all moved, and we all move so much more these days, and the millennials and zennials are going to do exactly that, we're only going to overcomplicate the world and probably destroy more HR reputation if we keep trying to, invent our own sliced bread around here. So I think there's just something that says tamper with perhaps the edges, but only to suit your organization. But the theory behind it is, it's long time proven. So buy works for me, but blend it at the right time. So sometimes blending it with bringing in the external or the fresh perspective is just as important as growing your own internal skill set.
Peter, you want to take this, sum it up from the team?
I think, well, I guess I could spend a long time summing it up, but I think it's been an interesting conversation, and probably reinforces a number of things for me. I think one is being clear why. So we start off with at the beginning with being clear about why you want to do have an org design capability in the business to start with. So being clear about what that question, the answer to that question is, being clear about the methodology you want to use, then being clear about the capabilities you need to deploy that methodology, and then being very clear about how you're going to build that methodology. And I think they're all they're all questions that have to be answered, and you can't miss one out. I think what comes through quite clearly is training is not enough. You've actually got to get you've got to get stuck in and do the work, otherwise the training doesn't stick. And I think that last conversation, I was interested. I was wondering how people were going to answer that last question: do you build or do you buy a methodology? I mean, I know, I guess working for consultancy, it's obvious where my thoughts are going to lie on that. But I've been in both camps in the past, and back in the 90s, thinking, well, I knew it all, so I'll just build one of my own. And I think, as Lynsey said, you always find out there are gaps in it. So I would always be in the buy camp, not the build camp. But I don't know if the three on the panel want a final last final thoughts, final wisdoms they want to throw in before we hand over to Reagan to tie up.
Tricia, you want to go first?
No, Jilly's going first.
No, I was
She's
just
gone
going to
off
say I
mute.
like what Peggy's saying. I'm just reading what Peggy was saying in the corner of the screen.
Do you want to repeat that? Everyone may not be seeing that.
So she was saying that there may be tools and templates that can be customized, but 20 years ago when you were 20, and so was Peggy, Mark, that she found it very informative, and you know, years of playing with the Deloittes, McKinseys and the Towers, not necessarily been any better than Bought Solution. So it's just interesting to read.
Any final words of wisdom from you, Jilly?
I've been quite deliberate about wanting to share a skill set with people that I found very beneficial. And I've done it as early as possible for teams that I've worked with. But I'm very conscious of what Mark described before, which is you set people up to be quite desirable in the marketplace. So making sure that you continue to have interesting work is just as important. And I found it invaluable to have it as part of a skill set. And I love it when the partnering team also asks if they can learn, because they see that the fun that the strategic business partners have. And one interesting insight, a lady in my last company has gone on to do some great work. She got the job as a result of her org design capability and is teaching her boss, which I think is great.
That's great. Lynsey and then Tricia. We'll end on Tricia. So Lynsey, any final words of wisdom to our participants?
Yeah, so I think thinking back on the conversation that we have been having, I think one of the important wisdoms, I think, in that business partner role within HR would be to really sow that seed to create the demand for organisation design. And I guess if you're willing to then create that demand within the business, then be prepared to be able to then deliver it. So get yourself ready. So if you are equipped enough to have that foresight, then get yourself planned and prepared.
Good. And Tricia.
So I think I will just end with Jilly gave me another thought about why I would recommend buying a methodology versus building your own methodology. So with my organization, as I said, we built the methodology. It's grounded in a lot of the same research, but it's not as robust as, for instance, the on the mark methodology. And there's continuous improvement as we learn and we grow. There's always opportunities to evolve your methodology. But when I think about what's fun about org design, it is out there being with the business and actually doing the work of org design. And when I think about retaining the experienced org designers, it's about allowing them to do fun work. And I don't think that keeping the methodologies and the toolkits up to date is really what our senior org designers think of as fun work. And so just another reason why we, no offense, Mark, but another reason why I would support buying it is so that your org consultant's highest and best use is they're able to go out and practice and coach and consult and not worry about updating the methodologies and the toolkits.
I want to say give a heartfelt thank you to you, Tricia, Lynsey, and Jilly for your time. It's hugely valuable. And thank you guys for the investment and sharing your experience with our participants. And it's a good reminder and learning for Peter and myself, as well as the On the Mark team who are on the call. So thank you guys very much. I do want to just highlight a couple of things. If you're interested in joining any professional organizations having to do with organization design, there are 4 out there: the Organization Design Community, the US Organization Design Forum, the European Organization Design Forum, and the Socio-Technical System Roundtable, all viable, very good organization design industries. And in that, on behalf of Peter, any closing words you want to say to the group?
No, other than thank you very much. Reiterating what Mark said, I've learned as ever. I've learned a lot from it. It was great being here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And again, Tricia, Lynsey, and Jilly, big thank you for joining us and really making this webinar fantastic. Thank you very much. And Reagan, to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I loved just hearing everyone's thoughts, and it was really great to have the three of you with us, as well as everyone else attending. So if there's any follow-up questions that you have, feel free to reach out. I believe everyone has my email. It's rgittin, Gittin, at onthemark.com. But you can also find us on the website. You can sign up for our newsletter. We have a monthly Ask Me Anything session. So if you have further questions in relation to this, that would be great to attend. Our next one is going to be June 11th. And we also have a blog that we're constantly posting on. So we're always available if you have any questions or comments. But hopefully you found this helpful. It was really wonderful speaking with Lynsey, Tricia, and Jilly. So thank you, everyone. And we will have the recording available, and on the website, we'll send it out as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.